This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Charles L. Welch, known as Chuck, to our podcast this morning on Reimagining Higher Education. Chuck is the president of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, a position he took up in 2024. So rather than I tell Chuck's history, Chuck, tell us about your education and in particular, what stood out. Were there teachers that stood out as being exceptional that helped you? And then, in fact, we might start off with your telling us about what does the American Association for State Colleges and Universities, who do they represent and what is their purpose and function?
Sure. Well, Judith, thank you. It's great to be with you and have the opportunity to talk about AASCU and my journey. The American Association of State Colleges and Universities is one of the 6 presidential associations that represent the different sectors of higher education in the United States. We represent the regional public university sector, which are public institutions that represent 86% of all public universities in the United States, and about 70% of students, educating approximately 5 million students a year. Regional public institutions are not going to be your land-grant institutions. They are typically not going to be your largest budgeted or largest research universities, but they are going to be the workhorses of higher education, producing approximately 67% of all public baccalaureate degrees and 68% of all public master's degrees annually. And so our role at AASCU is to represent those institutions on the political advocacy side, talking about who we are, the things that we do, making sure that we have resources and programs to support our institutions. And then we provide a whole host of different leadership and training opportunities for our institutions. And we are a key connector between the institutions and private funders where we can do new and innovative approaches to student success and ways that we can advance higher education as a whole.
So you are really both an advocacy body, an enabling body, a networking body.
That's it. Absolutely. The networking piece is a huge part of what we do, finding ways that we can connect our presidents and chancellors and share best practices and ways that they can have individuals to lean on. It's often said that the presidency is a lonely place. And so we try to find ways that we can help to build those networks of support and peer relationships around the country.
And the diversity of institutions, both their missions, their size, and their reputations, would make that a very interesting and conceptually and politically demanding sort of role. So how do you manage that?
It is. It's challenging. I mean, we have campuses, we have members in 47 states. We have members in multiple U.S. territories and some international countries. We have campuses that barely have 1,000 students. We have campuses with 40,000 plus students, urban, rural, high research, low research, red states, blue states. And so it can be a real challenge, particularly as you talk about legislative advocacy and you're having to navigate the political cultures of different states. Obviously, states that are have very conservative political lean versus states that have more liberal lean. So that can be a challenge. And then, as you say, those that have more resources, less resources. And so we have a number of different approaches, too, to really try to be more targeted and strategic. We have a rural initiative. We have a research initiative and committee. And then we have different what we call affinity groups. We represent the vast majority of public HBCUs in the country and a lot of minority serving institutions. And so we do try to tailor certain programming to ensure that everything's not just general and 30,000 feet where members are only hearing half that is applicable to them, but that we can truly try to speak directly to their interests.
So you are a native of Arkansas, and I think you're called Arkansans.
That's correct.
Now, the only other Arkansan that I'm really familiar with was a president of the United States. And
Yes,
he actually went to a university that
he
you went
did.
to.
He did.
Tell us about your experience as an undergraduate and a postgraduate student, and your journey to becoming both a college president and now your current role.
Sure. Well, it certainly wasn't by design, Judyth. My family, unfortunately, was like too many families in my state where higher education had not been something that they had been able to achieve or really even aspire to. Um, Very much an agrarian family. None of my grandparents were able to even get past the eighth grade because once you got to that point, you were able-bodied enough to go work in the fields. My father's father could not read or write. My father did not graduate high school. My mom was a high school graduate, but really, even with my extended family, college was not something that was typically looked at. Now, I can say, and I'm very blessed that my parents were always incredibly supportive. There was never really any question about whether I would go. But they really didn't know. They knew they wanted me to have what they weren't able to have, but they weren't really sure what that meant. And so I went to college as a first generation college student, largely unprepared for what existed and what was there. I was, I didn't know the differences in a lot of the terminology or programs and things of that nature. But I knew that it was a way to afford me opportunities that my ancestors did not have. And then when I got there, I really immersed myself in the institution. I really found ways to engage and interact and find support groups that could help me to really feel like I belonged there and had opportunities. And then, but as far as a career in higher education, that was certainly never anything I had ever even remotely considered. I sort of have a history. Every time I'm in front of a group of prospective leaders, I ask them, or current leaders, I ask them to raise their hand if they went to college with the intention of becoming a university administrator. And to this day, I've not had a single hand go up. I don't think anybody goes with that intent. It sort of happens organically. And for me, it came about. I was president of the student body at the University of Arkansas. And it was during that I began to sort of see the transformative nature of higher education, the impact that administrators could have on opportunities for students. And it was my academic advisor, my junior year of college, who said to me, "Hey, we need to start thinking about next steps. What is it that you intend to do?" And I said, I intended to go to law school, just simply because that was just the natural next step, at least I thought, in the journey. And I'll never forget, she looked at me and said, "Do you want to be an attorney?" And I'd never really had the question that directly posed. And so she started in with a series of other questions. And she said, "I think you need to go back and rethink what your next step is." And it was through that, Judyth, that I began to think about higher education as a career. And then I began to lean on some of my mentors and talk to them. And that forever altered the course of my life and my journey. And I'm so grateful for that advisor asking that very simple question. I actually had a conversation this morning about the importance of academic advising being holistic, not just being a gatekeeping aspect of do you have the prerequisite, but really about helping students find their path. And that's what happened for me. And so I was able to get engaged in higher education, change the complete trajectory of my life, and then was fortunate at a young age to be hired as a chancellor at a community college, a president at an independent university, and then president of a system for the last the 13 years prior to coming to AASCU, and it's been a wonderful journey.
And your discipline was political science.
Yeah.
So in terms of your discipline, do you draw on that consciously and unconsciously in terms of your management approach, the way you solve problems and really navigate the complex world of higher education?
Oh, absolutely. The original plan was to go to college, get a law degree, and then enter the field of politics. I had been president of the student body in high school. I'd been president of the student body in college. You mentioned one of the people that was very prominent. He got elected, Bill Clinton got elected president my sophomore year of college. And although I'm very pleased I didn't go that route and very pleased the route that I did end up, I mean, I think political science and the things that I learned have definitely been incredibly beneficial. I try to encourage students to to go and do an internship in Washington, or at least an internship in their home state, because you learn about the importance of compromise, you learn about the importance of communication skills, you learn about the importance of conflict and having to deal with different peoples and opinions and backgrounds. But that at the end of the day, you should be there to try to help people better themselves, which I think is the goal of political science, is to help other people have a better opportunity, which is the goal of education. And so I think there are an incredible amount of similarities there. There's a lot of politics in higher education, obviously, as you know, that help navigate it as well. But I think it also is one of the reasons why I sort of steered towards the system presidency that I did for 13 years, because they tend to be much more political and focused on public policy and advocacy, and then certainly in the role that I'm in right now.
So when you reflect on your undergraduate experience in particular, it seems as though your advisor played a very important role. But what was your experience like as a student at that time? And then reflecting on your experience as a student at that time,
right?
Compare it to nearly 2 years ago, you were head of a system, so you're not that far away from
Right.
from that coalface. So what was your experience like, given that you were first in family?
Sure. So I would say that overall it was a phenomenal experience, and I wouldn't trade anything or go back and change anything. I would be lying if I didn't say the first year was more challenging, just because being that sort of trailblazer in the family, not having an understanding of the way that higher education worked or how the terminology worked, not really having that support system. Although I had very supportive parents, they didn't really understand exactly how to support. And I had some members of my family who did not support this. They saw it as, oh, does he think he's better than this? Why does he need to go do something when nobody else has had to do that? Just really, a cultural situation that I had to overcome. But then once I was able to build my support unit, once I was able to sort of get deeply engaged in campus and the different activities, I loved every second of it. Now, I was one of these people that was highly motivated to finish in 4 years. And honestly, after that, I was kind of thinking, why didn't I try to stretch that? Because these were some of the best days of my life. And then went on and got, my master's degree in Washington, D.C. So a very different environment. First time I'd been away from home. First time I'd been in a metropolitan area that really exposed me to so many other things. And then went back to Arkansas and finished my doctorate. And one of the things that I knew is I wanted to return to my home state and spend a considerable amount of time, because we are one of the lowest educational attainment states in the country. And I wanted to be able to talk to other students about what is possible and how transformative it had been for me, and find ways to try to lift up the state. And so I'm grateful I had the opportunity to do that. 20 years as a president. But there's no doubt that the academy has changed dramatically over the course of the time. When I graduated, which was 30 years ago, actually, when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, number one, I think it's changed, obviously, from cost perspective. It's incredibly expensive, and we've seen those expenses go up over that 30-year period. It's changed from a public opinion and value situation. Nobody questioned whether higher ed was a good thing 30 years ago like they do now. It's changed from an access standpoint. Obviously, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have access to online education. It's changed from student health and well-being. Students are bringing to campuses now far more well-being challenges than perhaps we had at that time. Some of that's related to social media. And just the nature of our world right now in terms of the disciplines and what's important and the jobs of the future. And so it's a much more challenging time now. I recently had a member of the media asked me how I survived 20 years as a president. And I said, because the first 15 weren't nearly as difficult as the last 5. And I say that it's not only difficult for the administrators, it's difficult for the students as well. It's a very different time because of the advent of technology and social media. There's also opportunities embedded in there that we didn't have. But I think overall, it's a time that we've really got to get back to fundamentals of talking about why it's important, what it affords an individual, and really trying to get back to those common understandings of why it's a good thing.
Did you have a particular teacher or a mentor when you were either in your undergraduate or your postgraduate degrees that you mentioned your advisor, but were there other people that really gave you the passion to do what you're doing now?
Absolutely. I mean, it goes all the way back to elementary school. When I had teachers who invested in me, and I'll never forget, my second and sixth grade teacher took me to an event at the governor's mansion with then Governor Clinton, that really opened my eyes to, I can do this. I fit here. This can be. And then every step along the way, high school and into college, I had those supporters. And then the individuals that I mentioned, the advisor, and then the chancellor of the University of Arkansas and the president of the University of Arkansas system at that time were people that really took an interest in me and helped me to see the possibilities. They talked me out of some things that I thought I knew better. They positioned me to do well. And they're people that I still talk to this day and reach out to say, help me think through this a little bit. Because I think that, you know, we none of us get to these places on our own, and we have to have those mentors. And now I really want to try to give back. And I tell young people, you know, reach out to me, call me. It's the best time of my day when I'm trying to give back to the people just like those who gave to me. And so there are also the individuals that I've tried to pattern my life and my career after, looking at, you know, the things that of the way they treated people, the way they approached students and student success, and the way that they carried themselves in their leadership roles that I think really sort of have helped make up my leadership philosophies and approach.
It sounds as though throughout your life and your career, people saw your potential and they supported that potential. And to your great sort of grit, you actually achieved it. When you think back on your leadership of a number of institutions, public institutions and a private one, what were the things that you drew on through your political science background, but also through that sort of, in inverted commas, the apprenticeship you had from people who helped you?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things, Judyth, that I always tried to do in all of my leadership positions was put myself back in the shoes of that 18-year-old first generation student that I was. And when I would make a decision, try to make decisions that were based on the fears that I had then, the hopes that I had then, the opportunities that I had then. I also always tried to look at it. This is something I learned from some of my political mentors, because I moved to Washington for those 2 years, got my my master's degree, and did a little stint in politics at the urging of my mentors. Although I knew I wanted to come back to higher ed, they said, you need to go have this opportunity. I mean, the president of the United States is from your home state. You'll never have this opportunity again. And I'm so grateful that I did. But I learned so much then it's about people at the end of the day. And everything that we do is about trying to do the most for the most and trying to do good for as many as you possibly can. You can't always make everyone happy. But if you're making decisions that are rooted in people, their interests, their dreams, their hopes, their opportunities, their fears, you're likely going to make the best decisions more often than not. Now, I'm not going to say I haven't made mistakes, and I haven't, because I have, and that's okay. I think that's another thing. In my office, I have a portrait of a basketball goal in an old gymnasium, and it says, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And so I'm also a firm believer in you've got to take risks, and you've got to put yourself out there, and you've got to do things you think you can't do to try to overcome. And so I've always had a weak spot in my heart for those first generation students, those students from families that didn't feel like this applied to them, because I know what it's done for me. Now, I'm not naive. I realize that everybody that gets a college degree is not going to be as fortunate as I have been to have the opportunities I have. But I know without a shadow of a doubt that you'll have more opportunities than you would have if you didn't go to college. And so I think leaning on those things about people and relationships and communications, those are the things that I put the most stock in. I've always said that if I interview two people and one of them has a 4.0 from the best university in the world, and the other one has very strong, has a decent academic record, but has very strong interpersonal communication skills and the ability to work collaboratively, I'm going to go with the latter 9 times out of 10, because I think that's the key to getting things done and being successful in life.
So we're living in, as the Chinese say, interesting times. We've got...
It's an understatement, I think. So
I hope you notice I'm being very cautious.
yes, I do that daily. That's part of my daily life now.
So we've got technology, AI, and the impact that's having on all sorts of elements across higher education. And now we've got, there's the economic, cultural, and social debates that are happening about the value of higher education. So let's start off with, and you mentioned in terms of your experience in your postgraduate work, and certainly mine, we didn't have access to the internet. We didn't have, that immediate feedback on our work. So what do you see as being the risks of AI, but also the opportunities of generative AI?
Well, I think it can be, as you can imagine, this is an ongoing discussion and something we talk about within our organization and something we talk about with our campuses frequently. And for too many, I think they're scared of it. AI can be bad. There's all these negative things. I think the key is understanding the risk associated, applying the appropriate parameters, and then using it responsibly, because I think there are so many incredibly positive things about AI. When you think about it, and I'll be simplistic here, but something like Grammarly, that is not writing my comments for me, but it's making suggestions. I've been accused of never meaning a word I didn't like. It can get overly wordy, right, when I'm writing. Grammarly may say, hey, you don't really need this word in this. And so things like that, you can't replace, it can never replace human ingenuity and the power of interconnectedness and relationships and collaboration. But it can help us to be more efficient. It can help us to, I think, be stronger in some of the work that we do. The key, though, is making sure that we're using it responsibly and that we know what the purpose and value is. And so I talk to my children frequently about this because, they're exposed to things with ChatGPT and some of this in their studies that I could have never dreamed of. And it's about use it as a tool, don't use it as a replacement. And so that's the thing I think we try to always look at as well. But I think there are more benefits to AI if used responsibly than there are downsides. But again, we have to recognize the risks. We have to be honest with ourselves about those. We have to set those parameters on the front end. But at the end of the day, I think it's something that if used appropriately could be a wonderful way to enhance learning and really to help us even have a deeper dive into some of the subjects that we're teaching.
And I heard you use the word learning, and you're focusing on the learning possibilities and opportunities,
Right.
while at the same time recognizing that there are productivity benefits as well.
Absolutely, 100%.
So when you go into your office and look across the landscape of higher education and the challenges that are going to be faced at least in the next 2 years, possibly 4 years,
Right.
what are you seeing in terms of what will happen to higher education in the US in an administration that doesn't seem to be particularly sympathetic?
So when people ask me, Judyth, list the top 3 challenges for higher education, my response is always value, value, value. Those are the top 3. The way the public values higher education affects everything else. If the public doesn't have the valuation piece, doesn't see the return on the investment, doesn't believe that it's important, it's going to hurt enrollment, it's going to hurt persistence, it's going to hurt student success, it's going to hurt governmental investments. Everything else fails as a result of that. So I think the number one thing that we have to do is find a way to change the narrative about the value, or to push back on that narrative that maybe higher education isn't worth it. You can look at basically any of the things that policymakers tend to point to as a challenge, whether it's unemployment rates, income levels, thus tax generation, whether it's incarceration rates, whether it's reliance on public support services, whether it's healthcare costs, longevity. Every one of those things improves if an individual has a college degree. Every single one of them. So the facts are very clear. If you have a college degree, you're going to do better. Your community is going to do better on average. We got to get away from the anecdotes of these 3 people didn't have a college degree and they did okay, therefore it must not be worth it, because the data is clear, the research is there. The other thing I will say is this, and this can be a little provocative, but I think it's important to say it. The people who most frequently scream the loudest that higher education is not worth it got a college degree themselves and are sending their children to college. So they clearly see the value that is there. The challenge we have is those first generation families like mine don't have that deeper understanding and can be easily spooked. There was a publication that put out an article several months ago about higher education hits $100,000 tuition mark. And I immediately picked up the phone and I called the editor and I said, no, higher education didn't hit the $100,000 tuition mark. That one institution did. And I said, my parents would have thought that $100,000 tuition mark also applied to the institution down the street because they didn't know any better. We've also got to quit talking about higher education in a one-size-fits-all approach, because the things that many policymakers and the general public don't like, high cost, high debt, social unrest, all of those things, it's not uniform across every sector and every institutional type. There are plenty of institutions in this country where if a student wants to attend with very low debt and great support and graduate and do better, they can do that. And so I think that, we've faced these challenges before. This isn't the first time. There have been assaults on higher education, but we've got to push back. We've got to tell our own stories. We've got to change internally. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is all because of external forces. There have been times that we as an academy, myself included, have been our own worst enemy. And we've got to really rethink the way that we approach our institutions, the way that we approach our programming, our pricing, our willingness to change, to modernize, to be adaptable and flexible. And I think that if we do that, we'll survive this, because at the end of the day, again, it's still the single greatest investment an individual can make in their life. It's also the single greatest investment that a governmental entity can make in their people. And business and industry still largely tell us we value that college degree. And so I think it's just a matter of we've got to respond. Will we have some difficult times? Yeah. I mean, I think we're in that right now. But I think we can overcome it. I think there's ways, and we're going to have to be willing to change, and we're going to have to be willing to speak up and push back.
So what I'm hearing you say is the narrative has to be recalibrated. And part of that recalibrated narrative has to be much more accountability and transparency.
Absolutely.
We need to defend the decisions we make.
Absolutely. 100%.
So why haven't we done that previously?
Judyth, I think some of it is we got comfortable. We thought there will always be more students here. There will always be more dollars here. We got into a bit of an arms race on both pricing and facilities. On pricing, we got caught up in this you get what you pay for mentality, and institutions artificially inflated their, quote, sticker price, but then turned around and significantly discounted that. But the discounting piece doesn't get told. The sticker price is what gets advertised. Nobody goes to a car dealership and expects to pay the sticker price. But yet we've let that mentality in higher education apply that, oh, this is how much it costs, and it's that or nothing, where the vast majority of our students don't pay anywhere near that. The other thing we've done is when we talk about cost and we talk about student debt, everything's averaged. So the students taking the highest amount, whether they're going to get a PhD or an MD, that's getting lumped in with the student that's going to get the baccalaureate at their local regional public university. And so we've not disaggregated the data enough. So I think that we got comfortable. We felt like, hey, there'll always be enough students. Everybody will always value it. There'll always be enough money. And obviously, that's no longer the case. And so now, unfortunately, some campuses are being forced to do it, or they're closing their doors, as you see. And so what we're trying to push for, what I'm being very vocal about, is even if you're currently in a position of strength, now's the time to try to make these changes so that you can, regardless of what is thrown at us in the coming years, we can respond more easily.
So if we were to have this conversation again, I said, "G'day, Chuck. It's 5 years since we've seen each other."
Right.
You're held up pretty well.
I hope so.
What do you think? What sort of things do you think we'd be talking about?
Well, I think I hate to be a cynic. I think we'll be having some of the similar conversations. I think higher education, I've often said that higher education is like a cruise ship. Enacting change in higher education is like a cruise ship. It takes a long time and it's difficult, right? To turn that cruise ship around. And I'm not naive that institutions are going to immediately run out and say, hey, we're going to be different. We're going to be more efficient. We're going to have a different approach. I think it's going to take time. And unfortunately, I think in too many instances, it's going to take more crises to force campuses into that action. But at the same time, I think that hopefully through some of these crises that are happening currently, we will see institutions that have learned to be more nimble. You know, if you look at the pandemic, that forced our institutions to utilize technology more. It also reinforced the importance of face-to-face instruction to our students and their families. I'll never forget my children who, when they found out, ooh, we don't have to go to school in person, were jumping up and down, and 3 or 4 weeks later were begging to go back because they were missing those social aspects of their peers. And so, I mean, I think there'll be some of the things that we'll see better, but I still think we'll be talking about affordability. I still think we'll be talking about the need to be more efficient and change. And I think we'll still be talking about the value proposition. I'm hopeful that it'll be a maybe not as dire a conversation, and we'll start to see some of the turn of public opinion. But I don't think this is something that's going to change overnight. And quite frankly, I think it's a conversation we'll still be having 5 years from now.
So do you think I mean, interestingly, in the US, universities are in the main a state responsibility rather than a federal responsibility as in Australia.
Right.
But in Australia, it's also a state responsibility because universities come under a state act. But do you think that university presidents and university leaderships are up to the challenge of managing sort of perfidious policy by media release, changes, the appointment of people who don't understand the business? And how will presidents and your association in particular just respond to that total context of unpredictability?
Sure. You know, the future of leadership is a serious question that keeps us all awake at night. You know, it used to be that the average presidential term was 7 to 9 years, and then we saw that go down to 7, and then we saw that go down to 6, and now we're right at 5, if not a little less. And we lose a number of presidents in the first year because the jobs are difficult, the political challenges, the need to enact that change is typically not popular internally. And then there's obviously the external pressures and forces that are upon us. I'm a big proponent of the diversification of the presidency, both in individuals' backgrounds and personalities and career experiences. I don't think there needs to be a one-size-fits-all approach. I had a very non-traditional path to the presidency. I was 31 years old at my first presidency, and so very different, didn't go up the normal track. And I'd like to think I've had a relatively successful career path. And so I want us to really think, could we bring in people from business and industry that could give us an entirely different approach to the presidency? You know, sometimes saying we need to run our campuses more like a business is frowned upon. But at the same time, management of universities now, particularly on that business and operations side, is dramatically different than it was 20 years ago. And so I think it's again, us thinking differently, being willing to sort of push our comfort zones and the people that we hire, making sure we equip them with the resources that they need, and making sure that we provide the support systems for them. We always talk about support systems for students, and they're critically important. I needed them as a first-generation student. But we got to have those same support structures for our presidents and chancellors too. I spend a lot of time. I joke sometimes that maybe I should have gotten a counseling degree because I spend a lot of time on the phone with presidents, helping them think through possible solutions and playing devil's advocate with them and giving them suggestions and ideas and feedback, or sometimes just letting them vent. Because again, it is so hard. I'll never forget one of my mentors said to me before I had become a president, he said, Chuck, you can't really truly understand and appreciate this job until you've sat in the chair. Well, when he said that to me, I thought that was overly egotistical and arrogant until I sat in the chair and realized that no one else on a university campus has the same perspective as the president. No one else is responsible for the entire enterprise. They have their individual areas they're responsible for, but only that one person. And so it is different, and we've got to support that. But I'm not naive. We're not going to turn this around either. We're going to see more and more resignations, people that say this isn't worth it. This is affecting my quality of life, my mental health and well-being. I mentioned it for students earlier. Again, that goes to administrators, and we're going to have to be sensitive to it, focused on it, but we're also going to have to think differently about what the presidency is, who can fill these roles, what that looks like, and then, as I say, the support structures we give them to help them be successful.
Do you miss the job of president?
Yes and no. I love what I'm doing. I love the opportunity to be able to now work with presidents all over the country and try to help to build and grow. And I believe so much in this organization that helped me as a young president, that gave me that feedback. But I would be lying if I didn't say I miss sort of the dynamic aspect of campus life and students and faculty and all the wonderful learning that's going on and the research and the innovation. I mean, there's something about that. And so I love to go visit our campuses and see that. I was on a campus in California a couple of weeks ago, and it always re-energizes me and gets me ready to go. But at the same time, I think I am where I'm supposed to be now. And that is trying to help make sure that we give our institutions as many resources as they need to try to manage these difficult times.
I've got 3 questions left to ask you.
Sure.
What advice would you give to the younger Chuck?
Do it. It's worth it. You know, there's never been a day, Judyth, ever, that I've questioned, did I make the right decision in my career path? Some days were easier than others, but what I would say to that young Chuck is go do this. It's fulfilling, it's transformative, it's going to afford you opportunities that you could have never dreamed imaginable. And I'm going to say that same thing to any other young person thinking, could I have a career in higher education? To me, it's one of the most noble professions there is. We're giving back to help other people achieve their dreams and broaden their horizons and their mindsets. And so I don't think I would change anything, even the mistakes that I made. I think I learned from them as much as I did from the successes. And so it'd be very simple. Chuck, go do it.
So you've been to many hundreds of graduations during your tenure, both as a professor, but also as a president.
Right.
What advice would you, if you're walking around campus, what advice would you give to the next generation of graduates?
Push through. I can remember those days when I thought, I'm never going to make it. And it's so far out there. And should I quit and just go do X job? Do I really need this debt? Is this really worth it? But then I always found a way to push through. And that light at the end of the tunnel can be way out there. And let me be frank. I was lucky. I was able to do it in 4 years and then go get my master's and doctoral degree. I realize too many of our students today don't have that luxury. They're working, they have families. I mean, and that makes that even more difficult to see the end. But one thing that I try to impress upon students is, even if it takes you 6, 7, 8 years, it's going to change your life for the next 60 years. And you got to think about those 60 and not, the immediate 6 or 7. One of the things about society today is we like that instant gratification, right? And technology's allowed for that. That's not going to happen. You still got to go through that process. But the absolute best time of my year ever in working in higher education were the commencement ceremonies, and looking in the faces of those young people and not so young people when they walked across that stage and thought, I did it. I mean, I did this. I'm getting chill bumps just right now, but thinking about and seeing in their face, God, they are so excited about what just happened and they have no idea what awaits them. That's what energizes me and gets me excited. And so I'd love to say to all those students, go to a commencement ceremony and look at the faces of those people walking across that stage. That can be you. And then think about the lives that they've had. I got encouraged early on by a friend of mine to tell my story. And I was always a little bit hesitant because I thought that was kind of, bragging or oh, look what I've done. And he said, Chuck, particularly with how young I was when I got started as a president, I was 31. He said, people look at you and immediately think you were born into wealth and privilege and your dad was best friends with the governor or whatever. They have no idea that your background was similar to theirs. And you telling that story helps them realize if he could do it, I can too. And so now I try to tell it and I try to encourage other people to tell it, to realize that it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. It doesn't matter where you come from, it matters where you end up.
So you had grit, you had talent, you had passion. Is that what got you through, or were there other things as well?
Supporters. And I had mentors. I had people who would look me in the eye and say, you're screwing up, or you need to rethink this, or this is the best path for you. So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of self-discipline. I had the passion. I had the drive. I always had the ambition. I was blessed, I think, Judyth, in that my parents were incredibly they've got amazing personality. They could talk to anyone. They could talk to the president of the United States, or they could talk to the person who was cleaning the grounds, or whatever the case may be. It didn't matter. Any level of society, they could easily talk to them, and that helped me. I think it has always been something I've prided myself on. And I can remember my dad saying to me, if you ever treat the janitor differently than you teach the president, you and I are going to have a problem. And so, I mean, that stuck in there. So I had great parental support, great role models. I had the inherent abilities and passions, I think, but then that support structure, and I can't overemphasize that enough. Find mentors and listen to them. I tried to argue with my mentors too. They were always right. Thankfully, at the end of the day, I always listened to them, and they've helped me get to this point, because I certainly couldn't have done it on my own.
Chuck, my last question is a bit cheeky.
Yeah.
What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading a book about a chancellor's journey. It's a book that a retired chancellor wrote about his journey and the mistakes and the failures and the successes that he had. And because I think lifelong learning is important. And I may never be a president or a chancellor again, but I think it's important. But I think everything's applicable. I mean, I think the job that a banker does is applicable to what I do. A job that someone in retail does is applicable to what I do. And so I'm a big nonfiction reader. I really love to read about people's life stories and their philosophies and where they sort of bare their souls, because I think we can learn something. I'm not a big fiction reader. I'm not a big self-help reader. I really like to read the stories. Last summer, I read, actually it's been a couple summers ago now, I guess, I read back to back the biographies of Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, Arkansas, and the biography of Jeff Bezos. And, same industry, but very different approaches. But the one thing I found was they wanted to do something differently than anyone else had done it. They didn't want to be the best at what everybody else was doing. They wanted to do something different. And so I'm reading this book right now, of this retired chancellor wrote, and I've already been to several things. I thought, wow, that's applicable to what I did last week. And so I would encourage people to do that, and read, especially those people that are willing to talk about, hey, here's where I messed up. Here's where I didn't do. Here's what I wish I could have done, because I think there's lessons to be learned for all of us, regardless of our age or regardless of our position or where we've made it in our careers.
Well, Chuck, I've had a wonderful 45 minutes. I hope that you've enjoyed your
Absolutely.
45 minutes as well.
I have. And I thank you for your coverage of the work that we do and the importance of we've got to keep telling our stories.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.